Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Candace Cahill. Welcome to the show, Candace. I'm really looking forward to our conversation together.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
So listeners, Candace is a birth mother, and I had another look at her website. Links in the show notes, as always, before I started this conversation with Candace again today. And it really got me because the title of her memoir is Goodbye Again, and I'm getting like goosebumps, and something's going on for me bodily, like the shivers down the back of my spine, down the back of my spine, because the blurb cuts right like a laser through us, right? The blurb for her book. So it says Candace lost her son twice, and it's lost her son full stop twice, and it's just like, how does that cut through, and how do you come back from that? So it goes on to say that the first time to adoption, and the second not long after their reunion 20 years later. So, as you know, listeners, we're talking about healing, but how on earth do you heal from that? Not once, but twice. It's got to be a tough journey, right?
Yeah, it continues to be a tough journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've noticed this, listeners, but the questions I'm asking, sometimes I'm asking what's helped you heal, and sometimes I'm asking what's helping you heal, because it is still very current for some of us that we're on that healing journey. But we've all got a different definition of healing. So what does healing mean to you, Candace?
So yeah, as I've listened to some of your podcasts, particularly as you've moved into make healing a focus, it's made me really kind of sit down and think about it a bit. And I think for me, and I do think it's different for people based on their life experiences and the tools they've been provided or learned to use. But for me, it has really come down to the ability to integrate all of the shit that has happened in my life, but integrate it into who I am and accept it, take responsibility for the things I've done, wrong or right, and move on, keeping those things in mind, keeping them integrated, move on with compassion for myself and for other people. That's, I think, what it comes down to. And I think for me, thinking about it that way too, it allows me to continue to learn new tools and techniques. It lets me reflect on my life and my experiences and learn new things each time I reflect on them. It allows for growth. It's not you're healed, full stop. You're healing is how I look at it. Does that make sense?
That is one of the most eloquent and clear and broad definitions of healing. I love it. So what's the difference between, if there is one, is there any difference between integrating and accepting for you?
Yes, I think there is for me.
Okay. Yeah.
A big part. So one of the big turning points for me in my entire process when it comes to relinquishment and adoption was recognizing that I too was adopted, right? I had spent pretty much my whole life either not knowing, or once I knew, blocking it out, ignoring, pretending it wasn't there. So when I finally sat down and realized that my relinquishment and adoption, that piece of who I am, was fundamentally important to who I am right now and who I have become. I became aware of it first because I still didn't really want to integrate it. I didn't want to accept that to be a part of who I am. It took me a while to really bring it inside my body and let it be there and accept it. I don't quite know how to explain it, but I just know that I was fought against it so hard. I fought, just like the same the same piece with relinquishing my child to adoption. I believed all of the adoption is a beautiful narrative. You know, I bought into that entire narrative that says, you know, you're brave and this is the smart choice and you're not good enough, but other people are, that he would have a better life. I bought into all that stuff. And when I finally turned and looked at it the other way and realized that that wasn't the case, I didn't want to accept. I saw it, but I couldn't integrate it because that person who was gullible, who bought into that, I didn't like her. I didn't want her to be me, but I needed to take responsibility for that. So it took me a long time to be like, I can both take responsibility for the things I've done, particularly specifically when it comes to relinquishing my son. I can take responsibility for that, and I can still come back from that as long as I give myself grace and understand that that young woman who did those things back then is not the woman I am now. She's a part of who I am. And there's room for her to learn and be better.
Yeah. Have you heard this Trivial Pursuit metaphor, Trivial Pursuit cheese metaphor that I came up with? You heard me talking about that?
It seems familiar, but bring it on.
So, have you ever played Trivial Pursuit?
I have.
Yeah. So each person gets a cheese holder.
Yes.
And you get a cheese for getting the answer right. So you get a pink cheese, a yellow cheese, and all that stuff, right? So this this is my metaphor for the parts. So it sounds to me, and I may be wrong. Have you done some work with internal family systems, a parts therapist?
Only minimally. Everything I've done around it has been so fun, so fascinating, and so spot on. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the idea is that the whole self, right, the uppercase S self, from it, that's the cheese holder. Okay. And the different, so as you were describing yourself, the word that came to my mind that I wanted to ask you about was kind of the adjective that came to mind for you was perhaps one word was naive and the other one was kind of disempowered, right? So that youngster, that person who is being who the authority figures are bearing over, right? That's one of your cheeses. And the parts work of internal family systems, the name of the book of the founder says it all. So it's called No Bad Parts, right?
Right.
So if we carry the metaphor along, instead of trying to eject the yellow cheese, yeah, the yellow cheese is the disempowered young woman or woman who is being brainwashed and being made less than by the powers that be, who have a financial incentive to make sure that it goes through. and who have, they feel they have a moral imperative as well too, because they know better, they are better than you. So it's like the cheese. It's like we try and reject a segment of cheese, rather than, so integrating it and accepting it is allowing it to sit in the cheese holder. As you can guess, as you can gather, I'm a metaphor fan. So go on.
So I love it too, and I have so in response to that, I totally get that, and I understand it, and it totally makes sense to me, and I love the idea of the cheese holder. The other part of that is that there is a cheese wedge of me that was also the authoritarian, or the person, yes, we talk about these people in control, right? That manipulated me, coerced me, all these things, convinced me that I wasn't good enough and somebody else was, and that it was a beautiful thing. But there was a part of me that was saying it to myself as well. So I also need to integrate that, authority figure, or that person, that voice in my head that convinced me. Because ultimately, from my perspective, and this is part of integrating, is realizing that it wasn't just all these people in power and control and the adoption agency and all those things. It was me. I made that choice. And I have to integrate that part of myself too.
So yeah, there's this is where it gets really tricky, because we've got the authoritative cheese is the red cheese, right? And that represents the voice in our head, or that it represents the voice in that represents our inner critic, that represents our brainwashed part of ourselves. That, so I'm jumping around with metaphors, but kids' brains are like sponges. They suck up the good stuff and they suck up the bad stuff too, and they suck up that judgmental bit. So you've got it. We all have this, and people have been talking about this for centuries, if not millennia. We've got the two voices in our ear, haven't we? We've got we've got one on one shoulder and one on the other, and basically it's a cheese fight. Basically, it's two different sorts of cheese, one soft cheese and one maybe a brie or a camembert, and one red Leicester, fighting it out, and that's the inner turmoil and the most uncivil civil war that's going on in our head, and that just prolongs the battle between the two cheeses. And what it sounds like that's happened for you is one of those cheeses has waved the white flag of surrender, and it's just we're not gonna fight anymore.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about the cheesy metaphors is that we're actually laughing about trauma. Like, we're taking something that's really really yucky, and like the books, like the book titles, Goodbye Again, Primal Wound, The Body Keeps the Score. There's so much foreboding, isn't there? There's so much darkness, and by making it into a Trivial Pursuit cheese, hopefully we lighten it up a little bit, listeners, this is the first podcast interview in 420 I've been late to, because I had a sense of humor failure. The dog, our youngster, she didn't want to come home and have a tea. She ran away from me for 40 minutes whilst demolishing a sheep's skull. And anytime I got nearer to get her on the lead, she wouldn't come out. So I had a sense of humor failure, complete sense of humor failure whilst this was happening. I'm thinking the conversation with Candace, and you know, when our sense of humor fails us, it ain't good, is it?
No, no.
So the other themes, yeah. Do you see? You've talked about compassion. You talked about grace. How does that relate to? Or does that relate to this battle between the disempowered woman and the inner critic? Does grace and compassion, does that have anything to do with those?
It does for me. It's actually probably one of the biggest components for helping me turn the corner, in terms of coming to a place where I could at least kind of soften to all of this. I spent, you know, once I relinquished my son, I pretty much spent the next 13 years, or actually 23 years, really 23 years, berating myself. Right. So there was a part of me that was still saying out loud to people, you know, this was the smart choice. This was the right thing to do. That, you know, I was brave, da, da, da. But the bigger part of me was like, you just abandoned your son. So I was saying outwardly what everybody wanted me to say and what society wanted to hear. And inside I had a big baseball bat and I was just beating myself up over and over again. So the easiest thing for me to do was to really dissociate from it all. So I'm an excellent dissociator, still working on that. But what I needed to do, though, is be able to step back, look at everything that happened and my experience with all of this, and look at it not from kind of my perspective, but kind of step out of it. That's the best way that I can explain it. And because that was when I did that, that was when I was able to look at it and the way that I did it was writing. So writing my book was an important part in all of this, because I wrote everything. I just sat down and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I didn't edit. I didn't look at stuff. I just wrote. I wrote my story down as best I could. I meditated to try to bring myself back to that place. I used all my journals and all the writing, the letters, all of this, right? When I went back to read it all, which, it took me probably a year to write everything, right? When I went back to read it all, I didn't even remember writing it, right? It's like, because I had stepped out of it, I just let it. But when I went back to read it, I was like, oh my God, the things that were said to me, the manipulation and coercion that was used to convince me, I could see all of these things because I'd stepped back from it. And that was when I was able to show compassion to that young woman. But I hadn't been able to do it until then. And the compassion component is what allowed me to soften and then allow me to grieve, really, because I hadn't let that happen.
So the dissociation was a double-edged sword. It cut both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it was your perspective, the wood for the trees kind of thing, that helped you. And there's a couple of things just pop in mind for the listener here. I saw something yesterday. If you're thinking about writing a book, I saw something from an adoptive mum who's been on the show and also done some webinars for adoptee authors. I saw something about her saying, just don't edit. Don't edit. Most people write and edit at the same time. Do what Candace did. Like, just get it all out. Right. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that You know, I I was touched by the breadth and the clarity that you had when asked the question, what does healing mean to you? And if the writing process has given you that clarity, it sounds like to me. So if you're a listener and you're thinking, I can't describe, Candace may be able to describe healing like that, but I can't. It doesn't, I'm not even at that point when I'm ready to think about it. Give yourself some grace because Candace has been through the process, and pretty much, well, not a lot of the guests that we have on are authors, because that's how I find them, to invite them on. So if give yourself some grace, right? So let me go back to the question for you. What can you remember the moment when that perspective arrived, the perspective that kind of empowered you to the next stage of compassion? Do you remember that, when that happened?
Well, there were a couple of moments that are very clear in my mind. And the first one is when, as I was rereading basically my first draft of my memoir, and I believe at that time it was chapter 13. 13 is an important number to me for some reason. I have no idea why. I'm not a numerologist, but 13 is important to me. But and that was when it's like I literally at the end of that day, because I was, reading things as I went, and I was working during the day, and my husband would come home, and then I would process with him. And I sat down and I tried to explain to him what I had read and what I saw, that I, for so long, it's like, well, the agency, they were so good to me, and they were so kind, and my counselor was just this really lovely motherly figure and all this stuff. And at the end of this day, I sat down and I was just like, she totally like manipulated me, right? And he's sitting across from me, it's like, yeah, I know. Yeah, like he's like, you've talked about this and all these things. He's like, I've seen it since we got together, but you haven't been able to see it for whatever reason. So that was a very important, and it's classic to my husband. He's just like, yeah, I know. He does that to me all the time when I've had this profound awakening, right? Now, the second time
Sorry,
that
can
it
I
was,
just
oh yeah,
tell you, so had you got that insight partially before? No,
I was just
it was a new insight.
It was a new insight.
Completely new
Yeah.
insight.
Yeah.
Because so I think, you said stepped back. So the stepping back allowed you to see something that was clearly obvious to your husband, right? But it wasn't obvious to you because you couldn't see the wood for the trees, right?
Right.
Like you've got, like we're all, one of my old mentors used to say, it's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason I'm kind of laboring this is because I believe that, well, what would you call that? Would you call that an insight, a perspective shift? What would you call it?
Yeah, epiphany comes to mind. Yeah. Yeah. A paradigm shift.
Paradigm shift. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that they are the fundamental drivers of our healing. And like, do I hear? I may be. You see, I may be too close to this. I may not hear that from other people, but to me, healing happens through epiphanies.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can go with you on that.
And we can't, like it sounds, we can't. I call this hanging out at the bus stop for epiphanies, right? Because you placed yourself in the right place for it. epiphany. But you can't make it happen. You can't.
Right. Yeah.
You can't make it happen.
Right. Right.
You know, like I want to
Yeah.
have an epiphany now, right?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is kind of like this is what everybody's. What I think part of the problem with our Western world is this the idea of the empowered Simon or the empowered Candace, whatever. It's the empowered person. We can make this happen. You know, go out and make this happen. Go out. We can go out and make stuff happen in the external world. Sometimes there's no way I could make Indy come back to me. I tried 4 or 5 different things. I tried walking to so that I could get her on a leash, right? I tried walking towards her slowly. I tried sitting down, crouching down, looking at her, giving some bit of space. I tried like turning my back on her, ignoring her, waiting for her to come to me. And then I actually took backward steps, right? I thought, well, I'll surprise her. This way she won't be going to. I couldn't make that happen. I had to wait for her to finish the sheep's skull that she was chewing, right? And we can't make epiphanies happen, but we can put ourselves, you know, in the space where we're hopeful that we can have them. We can't make them happen, but we can make ourselves kind of open to the opportunities here. And that was one of the things that as another big theme when you described healing. You talked about continuing to learn and you know, taking on new things and growing and tools. And you know, this idea, I don't know whether it came from the US or the UK or where it came from, this idea of lifelong learning was bandied around a few years ago. But what we're talking about here is lifelong learning. And whenever I get anywhere near this subject, I have to say to the listeners, if you wanted to know the answer to the word how, you are already doing it. By listening to this podcast, you are listening to people's insights. I'm trying to mine Candace's insights as best as I can and as precisely as I can, in the hope that those insights about what's helped Candace heal helps you on your healing journey. So, long segment. What do you make of all
that? Yeah, well, I'm with you all the way, and I think that for me anyway, and this may be true for other people, I don't know, but for me specifically, I think a lot changed when I was able to recognize that I can set myself up to have epiphanies, to heal. I can set myself up for success by learning new things, learning tools, learning techniques, you know. So like for some people, yoga, you know, they start doing yoga and it just brings this sense of inner peace, right? You know, they're breathing, they're in their body, all of these things. But for the next person, that doesn't work. They need to write, or they need to, you know, go to therapy. I mean, most people need to go to therapy, but not everybody. You know, but if we're not trying things, if we're not like, oh, I learned that, you know, this is what Simon does, right? I'm going to try that. And you try it. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. You move on to the next thing. But if we're not trying things or setting ourselves up to be in positions, then we're going to miss it all, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the therapist is, the essence of the therapist is about addressing that issue that I mentioned from a mentor of mine. It's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame, right? So the therapist helps us see the picture when we're in the frame, offers that third party perspective. So but whether it's yoga, whether it's writing, whether it's therapy, whether it's, I know you're a big fan of like communing with nature. I don't know if you use that word,
Yeah.
but you talked about doing your cross country skiing through the woods in Alaska. So nature, I get. So we how much snow have you got on the ground at the moment? You've got plenty of snow, I guess.
Plenty of snow. Plenty of snow.
So I get my nature fix walking the dogs, right? So
Yeah.
I never do my swimming as well to get me breathing. So all of these things are strategies, ways of getting us to an epiphany. That's the end goal. That is the end. Well, the end in mind is healing. The thing that comes before that is, as you say, as an epiphany. The thing that comes before that is an action or a series of actions or series of strategies, and it's not clearly not once and done.
No, and at the very first step, in my opinion, to all of that is a willingness. You got to be willing to open yourself up, and whether that means taking those specific steps. But I mean, I know a lot of people that, less people, because I'm very cognizant of who I surround myself with, but I've known plenty of people in my life who were just absolutely miserable, right? They're miserable, they're unhappy, all of those things, but they had no desire to try to get out of it. Pretty hard to have epiphanies if you have no willingness to move yourself out of that space.
Big learning. So let's dive back into the micro bit. So
okay.
So you told me, you shared this epiphany moment about the control freakery that was being waged on you by the adoption agency and this particular woman, and you were and this came to you in a discussion with your husband after sharing chapter 13. Can you take us through? Do you remember any kind of like physiological changes or emotion changes? Because you've described it. You've described what happened. What was going on within you at that time? Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't remember, and that actually tracks with who I am, because anytime something is uncomfortable, my pretty automatic response is dissociation from my body, and that's learned behavior, or was done for survival. I come from a pretty abusive background, so like talking with Tom and doing those things, that my automatic is again to shut down. So, but I do know that basically on the heels of that, it took me a couple of days, I think, to come back to continuing reading my book. Like I couldn't focus, I couldn't think. But in terms of really remembering what was going on in my body, or if there were physiological changes, I can't tell you that. And I feel like that being here in this physical body and being comfortable in this body is something I'm still getting comfortable with, but I'm just now getting to this point in my life where I'm happy to be here. This is where I want to be. And wanting to be here makes it easier to stay here when tough stuff comes up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I started some therapy before October time maybe, and the therapist spotted within, I don't know if it was seconds or or minutes, that I was similar to you. I was disassociating. So basically we've done a lot of work which has just been focusing on, I don't know, it sounds pretty weird, focusing on on feelings moving through my body. So the kind of closest analogy I can get to is almost like a pinball machine, but not as fast as that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So imagine I was tracking movements in my body like they were ball bearings, like 4-inch diameter ball bearings, and we were tracking them, and they were going. There was a tightness in my chest, and it was bouncing. It was kind of bouncing around,
Yeah.
and were flowing through my body, going down to my hands, and then going down to my left, and then coming back, and then going across my chest again, and then going down. So it was all about tracking the actual tracking the associating rather than disassociating. So
Yeah. What a great tool.
great tool.
Yeah.
And here's one. So just an aside. Yeah, I've started, so I finished. So she told me that she was thinking of slowing down, and she said, "Oh, the therapist, but I won't leave you in the lurch." And then, and before she a couple of weeks before that, she'd said to me, "Look, Simon, just give up with your intellectual stuff. If you want to work with me, then let's work together. If you want to do your intellectual stuff, then kind of do that." Okay, right. And my initial reaction to that was, oh, she's backing away from me. She's trying to, and so I shared that with her. And then, anyway, so a month later, so she said, all right. And so I'm thinking of slowing down, but I won't leave you in the lurch. So we booked the call for, not the call, we face-to-face meeting. We agreed it for my birthday, like last week. And then on the day before, I got a text from her saying, I've enjoyed working with you, but I can't continue with our counseling session. And when she'd threatened to basically sack me if I didn't give up my intellect stuff, I'd been scared of her backing away. But when she actually did back away and did it had no impact on me whatsoever. So like, oh, I can kind of see that the therapies worked, because at one stage I was worried about her backing off, and then when it happened, it was just like, what's going on for her? And so, and she didn't give any reason. And I sent her one pretty much straight back saying, I think we're nearly there. Would it be okay with you if we just do two or three more sessions and then call it? And she didn't respond to that. So and that didn't get me going either. So I was just thinking, oh, this is brilliant. I can see like she's put the proof up. What was the second? You said you were about to describe a second occasion when you had one of the your second epiphany, or that came to your mind. So rather than me waffling on about my therapist, why don't you get back to the point of the conversation, which is your stuff.
So the second big one was when I went to my very first conference. It was connected to relinquishment and adoption, which was the CUB, the Concerned United Birth Parents. Yeah, so that was several years ago. And my first conference, which first and foremost was, a profound experience just to be around an entire group of people that had been through the same thing that I'd been through.
Like 100 people or a couple of
there was like 100 some people there.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was powerful in and of itself. But the most important piece of that was They do a support group each day of their event. And they typically set it up so that there's one for adopted people, there's one for birth parents, and then there's a mixed group. So, so people could choose which one they would like to go to. Well, I went to the mixed group because I wanted and continue to want to hear the adoptee experience, because that's going to help me most learn things about my son, right? I mean, even though he's not here anymore, it'll help me understand what his life was like growing up, right? So I'm sitting in this room and there's like, I don't know, there's like 30 people in there, I mean, it's a pretty big group, and people are sharing around the room, and they the privileged voice is the adoptee experience in the group. So the adopted people are going first when they're talking about their experience. And I'm sitting in this group and I'm listening to these pieces of their stories all ping-ponging around the room, and I'm identifying with every single thing that they're saying. Like, I'm at a fundamental, right down in my gut, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I feel that. I experienced that. Because when I walked out of that room, by the time at the end of the meeting, I was like, the reason why I'm identifying with all this is because I am also adopted. I had not brought that integrated it into who I was until that moment. And it brought a big piece of the epiphany was, I mean, I had already been at a place where I was learning to accept the responsibility for relinquishing my son. But it brought it to a whole, the realization and the feelings that I experienced brought the epiphany piece of it was understanding at a more deeper and fundamental level the harm that I caused my son, the abandonment and the feelings of loss and grief that he experienced, and that I had done that to him. Because I remember how I felt when I learned back when I was 13 years old. So there's 13 again, but when I learned that I was adopted and realized, so I'm a step adoptee, right? So my mother divorced my father when I was a newborn. She remarried fairly quickly, and then her second husband basically forced my biological father to sign away his rights so that my stepdad could adopt me. But I didn't know that. I thought my stepdad was my dad. So when I found out when I was 13 that I had a different father, first of all, I was happy because my stepfather was an abusive asshole. But my second feeling was I was furious. I was so angry at my dad for abandoning me, for leaving me to this man who, just abused me so terribly. And those feelings of abandonment and anger, I hung on to those nice and tight for a very, very long time. But going into this, it's like I hung on to those feelings, but then I totally blocked out the adoption and that I had a different dad, because I didn't really want to know him because I was pissed at him. But being in this group and this support group and hearing all these stories and all the experiences and the feelings that people were feeling, I felt all of those over the course of my teenage years and young adulthood. But I just never recognized that connection, that they were a fundamental part of the fact that I was also relinquished and adopted. So that was a huge epiphany for me. And coming out of that, so now when I talk about that experience, there was a whole lot of physiological stuff that came along with that. I mean, you're talking about being a pinball. For me, it was ping pong. It's like I felt like I was being whacked from one side of the table to another. And I couldn't. It was physically painful, in addition to being an emotionally painful experience. Yeah.
Wow. So you mentioned that you'd listened to the episode released today or yesterday with Liz. She was talking about, we have to feel them to heal them. We have to,
Yeah.
And yeah, this whole idea of suppression. Intrigues me, because whenever I think about my own stuff like that, and I don't, I'm not quite, I don't get it. Whenever I hear somebody else talking about it, I think, well, it wasn't a conscious choice. Like I'm giving you. I want to give the utmost grace, to use your word, to the suppressor, if there is one. And like, what is it? Like suppressing it. It always sounds like we're doing it on purpose. And I've got a thing about doing stuff on purpose. It's like, just because my mum, my adopted mum, is great, and a real poster woman for unconditional love. Yeah, there's a couple of isolated. There's one isolated issue, incident. I ran over a road. I was about 10, and I ran over a road, and I didn't see this car, little van thing coming, and it hit me. It was only doing like 5 miles an hour, about 3 miles an hour, and it knocked me down, and I had a bit of a bruise. I got up. I walked down to the bus station. Half an hour, after half an hour, I'm home, and I tell my mum what's happened, because there's this bruise on my leg, and she says something like silly, or and I think, I didn't do it. I didn't do it on purpose. And this suppression thing, it's like, we're not doing it. We're not going around thinking, I need to suppress this, are we?
Right.
Like it's not a intentional act.
I believe it's a trauma response, and it's a, and I think everybody's trauma responses are different, based again on their experiences and their life. But I mean, I think for me, it has been and continues to be a trauma response. I think, and I do believe, and I am learning ways to go beyond that. It's there are times where I don't automatically go into that dissociating anymore. I'm becoming more capable of recognizing it when it happens. But the bigger or more traumatic the thing that happens to me is, the more likely I am to automatically respond that way. But I will catch it sooner, I think. I am catching it sooner. I hope I'm catching it sooner.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
You're going to beat yourself up for not catching it faster.
Yeah, right. I mean, I have another opportunity to beat myself up. That's exactly right. Yeah.
The red, pink bit of cheese is going to go back into battle.
That's right.
Thank you for helping me to such clarity with that, because I've never explored that suppression stuff, and although I may have been told, or maybe have heard, that it's a trauma response, that hasn't landed for me.
Yeah.
But it really lands for me now. And the word that came up for me was involuntary, right? It's not. We're not on purpose. It's involuntary. It isn't voluntary. It's involuntary.
Right.
So, and the thing I'm getting at here, this part of the dialogue, is sending me back to the cheeses, right?
Yeah.
So part of me traumatized Simon, right? So let's say that's the blue cheese, right? He's running the show, and there's a trauma response, and then judgmental Simon, was he the red one? I think was the red one, right? So then the red one, the red cheese, has no grace for Simon whatsoever.
No.
And is basically trauma shaming the other part,
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
another segment. So it's an internal trauma shaming going on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Now so that sounds like something that so that's new for me, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, that's new for me. So, but it sounds like it's not new for you. So
it is new. It's not new for me.
Okay. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, so actually what it brings up for me is there was someone you had on, I don't know, last year sometime. And one of the things they said, and I think it was your podcast, but it was one of the things they said was, the most important conversation we ever have, ever throughout our entire lives, is the one we have inside our head with ourselves. And I was like, yep, that's exactly it. Because I am so good at putting myself down, criticizing myself, I'm so good at it. And for me, a lot of it stems from the perfectionism piece. So I have always been a perfectionist and want to be a perfectionist. And I know that's also a trauma response. So, as I learn all these little pieces that are connected, it helps me to see where I can make strides and try to be better and give myself a break. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I went off in a totally different tangent there, but
you didn't. No, this is spot on. So if we go back to the cheese model, we are instead of trying to castigate the internal shamer cheese, we are giving that cheese grace.
Yes. Yep.
By saying it's involuntary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it allows for us to be to look at it and be just softer around the edges around it, so I want to share, so this is something that was a profound tool that I use to help myself, and I want to share it. And there probably are going to be a lot of people that think, oh, this is just so dumb. But it was really important.
I'm going to think of it exactly like that.
Okay,
that was a joke. That was British irony.
I know. But I want to share it because it was such an important piece of learning to give myself grace and being compassionate to myself. So when I was trying to figure all this shit out, when I'd finally hit rock bottom and was like, I just don't even want to live in this body anymore because I absolutely hate myself, basically, is where I got to. I was like, how am I going to do it? So I tried to research and find out what you could do. So this was a tool that I found, and it has made a profound effect in my life over the last 13 years. Stand in front of the mirror, look yourself in the eyes, and tell yourself, I love you. So the first time that I did that, I couldn't. I cried. I couldn't. That person looking back at me, I hated her so much for all the shit she'd done wrong. And it was so painful It was so painful. And 13 years later, I can finally say, just this last year, I can do this. I can look myself in the mirror and say, I love you, with a smile on my face and without flinching. But it's taken me that long to just accept who is looking back at me, all the parts and pieces of her, the mean, nasty red cheese, and all the, the different pieces. And that was it. It seems so tiny and so frivolous and so little, but it was as a little, look at the little girl in me, and the little girl that went through so much pain and had so many horrible things happen. And I just feel so much sadness for her. I could never do that before. And this little exercise made a big difference for me.
It's the marker of your progress, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that nice? I mean, I feel like it's a win. I feel like it's just a really big win. And it just, it's like making me want to cry now. That's like, I'm getting there. I still know I have a long way to go, but it's a big thing for me. And I actually, if one person listens to this and goes to their bathroom or goes to and looks in the mirror and they try it and it helps them, it's such an easy little tiny simple thing. If it works, why not? And if it doesn't, move on and try something else. But yeah.
Wow. That feels like a good place to kind of bring it in. But I want to ask you, is there anything else that you want to share that I've not?
Well, I actually feel like you and I could sit and talk for hours
well,
and hours. But
me too. Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to suggest, let's do another one in whenever, 3 months, 6 months, whenever you feel right.
Okay. Yeah, I would enjoy that. And I love thinking, the fact that you're going towards healing and helping people. When we talk about it and we hear how other people do it, that's when we can be like, oh, I should try that. Or that's probably not going to work, but I'll try. I mean, we just have to be willing to put ourselves out there and see what works for us. And this is the best way to do it, to find out how other people are doing it.
Yeah. Great. I thought it was only a small shift, but I think I underestimated the shift, the narrowing of the focus.
Oh yeah.
I think I underestimated. And I hope you're listening. I hope you're enjoying it, listeners. And we will speak to you all again very soon. Thanks, Candace.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, listeners. Goodbye.